Thistle Verse. As you may know, I'm hosting a readathon for 2 weeks in October called the Black SFFathon, along with Arlene of Lock Press Books and Jerry of Onyx Pages, Noria of Chronicles of Noria, and Lucie of LucieReads. If you didn't know and this is news to you, you can check out my announcement video for more details on what the readathon is going to look like this year. And I wanted to make a recommendation video to help people complete the reading challenges for this year's iteration of the Black SFFathon. And the challenges are a book with a blue cover, a book that's been on your to-read list, and a book with ghosts. Only you know it's on your to-read list, so I cannot give you a recommendation for that, but I will have recommendations for books and recommendations for short stories for the other two prompts. For people who do not participate in last year's version of the readathon, I made a free short story list. It's a list of various science fiction, fantasy, supernatural, paranormal, horror by Black authors that is available to read online for free. And it's compiled in the list, which is basically a Google Doc, so you can search it if you're looking for certain authors or certain keywords in the summary. I did a document walkthrough last year, so I'm not going to repeat that. I'm going to link last year's guide and explanation of the document in the description box below, so you can check that out if this is your first time hearing about this document. But for people who don't know, I read short stories pretty regularly, so the list is being updated throughout the year, so there are some new stories on there that were not available during last year's iteration of the readathon. Editing Chloe here. I just wanted to quickly add that this short story list I compiled was inspired by one that I saw Soila Kenya make for her African SFFathon. And so I just want to credit her and also encourage you to subscribe to her channel and follow her for content. So on to the recommendations. So for a book with a blue cover, we're talking novels. There's Hide and Seeker by Dacre Herman, which is a fantastic middle grade horror. It was one of my favorite releases in 2020. It's about this young Black boy, Zeke, and his friend was taken by this malevolent creature called the Seeker, who snatches children up during games of hide and seek. And I really like this novel because of how creepy it is, especially in our world. There's just these little details that set the atmosphere, and even before we meet the Seeker in its true form, there's already all this tension building in the story. The Seeker has agents in our world who are terrifying and despicable, and I thought the protagonist Zeke was very compelling. He has his own struggles that he's dealing with, but he's also kind of a leader in his friend group, and I think you really see why his friends look up to him in the story. He's very attentive, he's very selfless, he's a very engaging protagonist. And another book with a blue cover is New Moon's Arms by Nalo Hopkinson. This is an adult intrusion fantasy. It's about a older woman, she's in her, I think, 50s or 60s, who lives on this fictional island in the Caribbean where mermaids are said to swim in the waters. Aside from the mermaid activities, she's also finding that her menopause hot flashes coincide with her finding objects that she shouldn't be able to retrieve. At one point, a whole grove of cashew trees appears in her backyard. This is one I enjoyed because of how real the characters felt. The protagonist for this one, there's a lot of things to like about her. She's a very lively character, and she's also someone who's judgmental and will hold a grudge and really doesn't like to admit when she's wrong. But she's a very compelling protagonist. I was I was always even when I was rolling my eyes at what she was doing, there's always some part of me that was hoping that she would make a change for the better and turn things around. Another book I'd recommend is Temper by Nikki Drayden. It's an adult grim fantasy. This is about a future South Africa where colonialism never happened, and a society is basically formed where twins are very common, and there's sort of one twin who is considered to have more virtues than the other twin. The virtuous twin is kind of elevated into a higher class than the sinful twin. The protagonist of this book is this 17-year-old Aubin, who is the sinful twin in his pairing, and it's about how he feels about like this growing distance between him and his like virtuous twin. He also is possessed by the spirit of Icy Blue, who's sort of like this demonic presence, and it's about him trying to exorcise Icy Blue from his body. I think Drayden is an author who's very creative. Like, she's always going to have a lot of ideas. So there's always going to be like some interesting magic system, some interesting cultural thing going on in the society that she's created. And like the pace is, I thought, was pretty quick. Like, I felt like there's always like some new thing to discover, some new like push to like finish the story throughout. So if you like fast paced, like imaginative fantasy, this is a good book for you. My other recommendation would be Dragons in a Bag by Zesta Elliott. This is like a middle grade urban fantasy about a young boy who is left with like a family friend to be babysat, and this family friend has a bag of dragons, and he accidentally lets the dragons loose, and he has to go get them and return them. The protagonist is a very sweet boy. He's very earnest, he's very loyal, and I think the story feels very grounded. Like, there is like the whimsy of like teleportation and the dragons and the magic system, and there's also like these very concrete concerns about housing or like family estrangement. Another book I would recommend is Sorrowland by River Solomon. This is like an adult sci-fi horror. It's kind of a genre blender. It's basically about this teen mother, Vern, who has escaped a cult, and her body is undergoing these very painful changes, and it's about her trying to figure out what's going on with her. She's seeing visions, and it's also about her being like hunted and her trying to keep her twin children safe. This is one I liked because Vern is a very like compelling protagonist. She's very willful, but also she's like insecure, and she's like trying to outgrow the things she was taught in this cult that don't serve her any longer, but also there are ways that like this cult was like helpful to her. And so there's like a lot of like struggles going on with her that I think make her a very interesting character. The writing is very beautiful, very poetic, and I think this is a book where if you just read it for the plot and you just read it once and you're done, you'll enjoy it. I think this is also a book where if you like to think about like themes, this will also give you a lot to think about. And then my last novel recommendation for book with a blue cover is My Life in the Bush of Ghosts by Amos Tutuola. This is an adult fantasy. It's set in Nigeria, and there's like skirmishes going on, and it's about this young boy who kind of runs away from his village because of the violence that's going on, and he's accidentally driven into the bush where these spirits reside. And it's about his travelings, basically, in the Bush of Ghosts. This is a book that I think takes a little bit to get accustomed to. The writing style is kind of circular and repetitive, and I know that can be a turnoff for some people. Like, I think it's supposed to sound like a person talking, and if you've ever like recorded yourself talking, perhaps if you're on BookTube and played it back, you'll notice that like it's not linear and neat. Often you like circle around or you stop and come back to things, and that's kind of how the book is written. But the imagery is very vivid. It's very like episodic in a way. Like, the main character's in like a different section of the bush, and so there's like very different spirits in each part who want different things. Some of them are helpful, some of them are aggressive, some of them are helpful, and honestly kind of wish they weren't, because they're still scary. I think this fantasy is good for people who like things that focus on like the strange and the uncomfortable, whether that's like disturbing sights or disgusting smells or like unpleasant sensations. So in terms of short stories where there is blue on the cover of the issue of the magazine, there is To Rise Unopened by Jen Brown. This is like a sci-fi superhero short story that appeared in Anathema magazine. I won't say too much about this, but if you need to be convinced to give it a read, I would recommend checking out my interview with her. I will link it in the description box below. I really enjoyed myself. She was a lot of fun to interview. I learned a lot about her writing process, and she had some very interesting things to share about like looking at Black, queer, polyamorous superheroes, talking about generational divides and rivalries. Then there's Dust Daughter by Inda Lauren. This is a fantasy short that appeared in Uncanny magazine. It's about a young girl who can sense emotions that learns a shocking secret about her grandmother after her grandmother has died. This is a short story where the magic system is a little bit more nebulous. It's kind of like woven into the everyday, there's a big focus on family and family tensions. There's discussions of like colorism and fears of the power of women or other people that society has deemed as deviant. I think I just really enjoyed the layers to this story because it's also about a young girl like coming into her own and forging a connection with a family member in a way that she wasn't able to while they were alive. Another one I would recommend is The Cook by C.L. Clarke. I describe it as a low fantasy that appeared in Uncanny Magazine. It feels like medieval, but like there isn't really any magic that takes place in the story. And it is sapphic, and I think it's probably my favorite thing I've read by C.L. Clarke. Clarke has written many sapphic short stories, and there's often something tragic about the love. There's outside forces trying to keep people apart or pitting people against each other. And I think the love in this story is the most simple of anything that Clarke has written. The force that comes between these characters isn't really divisive. It's like a realization, I think. It's a realization that could potentially strain or break this relationship. I don't even know if there's a whole lot of dialogue in this story. It feels quiet and intimate and sweet. It's something that I recommend to a lot of people. You know, even my friends who don't necessarily read fantasy. Then there is Sunskins by Dara Sigunfalowo, which is a horror short that appeared in Baffling magazine. I don't really even know how to describe this one. It's about a group of gay sons and their very controlling parents who find out that, like, in their sleep, in their dreams, they've basically been having sex with each other, and it's about the actions that the parents take. And this story was just brutal and terrifying and chilling. I was just stressed the entire time I was reading it, just trying to figure out what the parents were going to do, what was going to happen next. And like just every time I thought it couldn't get worse, it got worse. I think there's something also terrifying about this for queer readers, in that like not knowing if your family is safe. This was like exquisite flash fiction. I was just like devastated. It was like it's like someone throwing a firecracker. It was just like a pop, like a sudden disruption, and then you're just like sitting in the aftermath, like, oh my goodness, like, what just happened? Like, that is Sunskins. And then another short story in the same issue of Baffling magazine is Vanity Among Worms by Brent Lambert. This is a fantasy, and it's about like this man Cletus who is new to town and he wants to fit in, and he like visits this nightclub, and it's really not what it seems. Well, it kind of is what it seems on the outside, but there's a little bit more to it. This reminded me of, I think it was Clones by Alex Smith that appeared in Stories for Chip. I think there's some discussions in there around like desire and gay nightlife that felt like similar. The story is satirical, but I think there's a little bit more to it. I think it's more than just a cautionary tale. So those were all the recommendations for books with blue covers. And then the next category for recommendations is books about ghosts. One book I'd recommend is A Spectral Hue by Craig Lawrence Gidney. This is an adult horror. It's about this fictional town in Maryland called Shimmer, where there's like this group of African American artists who have, over like the span of decades, somehow all created art with like very similar motifs about marshes and like the marsh biology and like these orchids, and also this very specific color of purple. These motifs pop up in all these artists' work. And it's about this grad student, Xavier, who comes to the town of Shimmer trying to write a paper basically on the history of art in this town. And he stumbles upon these signs that the art might be supernatural or paranormal in origin. I think for me this is a very interesting story in that the ghost is kind of like enigmatic. Like the ghost's effects are accidentally negative. Like the ghost is drawn to people and it doesn't mean to hurt people, but these bad things stem from it. But also like in the grand scheme of like ghost damage in horror books, it isn't that bad. Maybe. Maybe I'll reread it and like reconsider it, but I think that's something that struck me on the first read was that the ghost could have done things that were a lot worse than what it did. And I think the ghost's activities raise kind of like a central question around art as escapism versus like a calling or an obligation, art as like deviance, like art as a means of expression for queer people, art as a means of expression for people who society doesn't consider, society doesn't value their opinions, society thinks they should just labor and not create something that doesn't really serve a purpose. This is like an ensemble cast situation, so I think there's like 4 narrators. I think all the human narrators are queer from what I remember. Then another one I would recommend is Sing on Birds Sing by Jasmine Ward. This is an adult supernatural novel. It's a family story about this mixed race black boy who his father's side of the family is white and his dad's in jail, and he's being raised by his mother's side of the family. And it's kind of a family saga about, why his grandparents are the way they are, why his mother is the way that she is, and about like the history of the area. The ghost isn't like present like all the way throughout the story. I feel like the ghost is around for like maybe a third of it. The ghost is both like very pitiable and also like very dangerous and erratic.
Editing Chloe here. One of the reasons that I really enjoyed this story, even as it made my skin crawl, was the very frank discussion it had about interracial relationships. In the United States, there's like this focus when talking about mixed people, specifically on people with a black parent and a white parent. And in general, I remember, especially during my childhood, like mixed kids were such like a site of projection for like white media and white adults who didn't want to talk about racism and white supremacy. It was a lot of, oh, in 20 years, everyone will be mixed, the future is beige, blah, blah, blah. And there really weren't very many frank discussions about how mixed kids still deal with racism and how that racism can come from your family. And like even in mixed narratives that sort of addressed racism, there was this like both sides thing. It just wasn't like very nuanced discussions basically. And there wasn't really a recognition of like power disparities. And it made those stories feel kind of disingenuous to me. This story is a kind of extreme case in that the racism is like super duper blatant. Like it's like white family members using slurs, threatening harm to this black woman who's married their white son. But I think the point still stands that mixed kids don't make white supremacy go away. And that it can be really difficult watching your parents play like kick the can about the racism of the spouse, of in-laws, of parents, of grandparents, and like the effect that that can have on you as a child and your relationship with your parents. So like big content warnings on this story for the anti-blackness shown, like for sure. But it was a challenging read. Like it was a read where I had to put it down and like decompress for like a week, but also like it was also very emotionally rewarding.
And then my next recommendation is Just South of Home by Karen Strong. This is a middle grade ghost story about a town in Georgia where the KKK had burned down a church and killed a lot of African Americans, and there's like a graveyard to commemorate it. People believe the graveyard's haunted. The local townspeople stay away from it until one day someone's cousin from Chicago decides to go to the graveyard and take something out of it. And that awakens these spirits, and it forces a reckoning with the town in terms of what they remember, what they've been saying about the town's history, and what they need to do to start the process of like healing and moving on. In this one, the ghosts are sort of a like corrupted force. There's like some communication with ghosts, but it's a little limited. And then my last recommendation for a ghost novel is Hoodoo by Ronald L. Smith. This is another middle grade about a young boy Hoodoo who comes from a long line of Hoodoo workers. For some reason, it just seems to have skipped him by. And one day he starts being haunted by this malignant ghost called the Stranger, and he has to figure out how to banish it. This is creepy, it's very atmospheric, and the ghost is like a very threatening presence. So in terms of short stories featuring ghosts. There is Ghost Marriage by P. Jelly Clark, which appeared in Apex magazine. This is about a Dinka woman. Her husband has died and they've been bound in death, and her husband is like causing violence and wreaking havoc, and she's trying to basically get him banished. And there's also like an animal side character. I'm interested in like how animals perceive the world and how they interact with humans, and so I enjoyed having this animal side character who has an agenda and motivations of his own. Another short story I'd recommend is Summer by Tanana Reeve Dew, Queen of African American Horror. This appeared in Nightmare magazine. In this one, the ghosts are more of a nuisance than anything. They're relatively benign, but people's response to them is more what's revealing and worrying. This is a story about a mother whose child is possessed by a ghost. How she chooses to resolve the issue is like, some people might relate to it, some people might judge her for it. I just hadn't read a story like this before. And I was like really on the fence when the story ended on like what I thought of her action. Also, this appeared in Dew's short story collection Ghost Stories, which has a blue cover. So if you read Summer by Tanana Reeve Dew, you can knock out 2 prompts. And then another short story I'd recommend is Every Goodbye Ain't Gone by Eden Royce, which appeared in Strange Horizons. How could I possibly do a ghost recommendation and not talk about Eden Royce, writer of all things spooky? Eden Royce has written many short stories about ghosts, about talking to forces beyond the dead. She also has like an eye, I think, for like crime fiction. I think she will write about murders, other like kind of sordid stuff, and like bring the supernatural element to it. All that is present here. And this story is about a woman who's part of her family's catering business. Basically, they make the dead's favorite foods to bring them back to speak with the living for a few final questions. This one, the ghosts are truth tellers. They are a little dangerous, but also they might not be the most dangerous characters in the cast. There's just a lot of like great details here in terms of how the food smells and how it looks, and also like the atmospheric stuff of like the ghost's presence and figuring out the clues as the protagonist sees discrepancies between like what the client is asking for and what the ghost is telling them. And then my final recommendation for a ghost story is Old Habits by Nalo Hopkinson. This appeared in Uncanny magazine. Basically, this is about ghosts in purgatory. It's about a group of ghosts of people who've died in this mall. The ghosts are like deprived of sensation. At some regular interval of time, they have to relive their moment of death. And when they're not doing that, they don't really feel or experience anything. A few ghosts have left the mall and no one knows what happened to them. They're not seen or heard from again. And it's about this ghost like just basically considering his choices the rest of his life. So this is a short story that's more on the melancholy side, just because what awaits them in the afterlife. So yeah, those are all the recommendations I have for the Black SFFathon. Which of these do you think you'll check out? Do you have a recommendation that you'd like to make to me or other participants? Thank you for watching. Don't forget that the readathon runs from the October 3rd to the 16th. We're going to have reading sprints on the 9th and the 10th. Those details are all in the announcement video. And also we're doing a live show on the 16th at 2 p.m. EST to discuss our group book, The Forgotten Girl by India Hill Brown. I hope you can join us for that. And yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one. Take care. Goodbye.